Welcome back, everybody. We got Will and Iron here from the Block Runner MetaZone, Roby and MScribe, and today we thought we'd give you an update on what's been going on with Bitmap. What do you think, Iron?
I think it's a good idea, Willis. You're full of good ideas.
Yeah.
Definitely revisiting Bitmap, unlike, I don't know, feel like we've been doing this for a long time. Especially now, we're seeing public sentiment, I guess, falling off a cliff, would you say?
Well, I mean,
Would
we've
you
been
agree?
we've been doing this for the longest of times since its inception. If you go back, if you don't know what Bitmap is, we have like at least 40 to 50 videos talking about what Bitmap is and its potential. And so now that it's out there, it's in the hands of the people, and as a result, it's in the psychology and the ramifications of such. And so we see lines go up, we see lines go down, but
Yeah,
nonetheless, the value proposition that Bitmap brings is still there, whether the
yeah,
line and the numbers up or the line and the numbers down.
correct. Yeah, I love that word you said, ramifications of psychology, human psychology specifically,
Mm-hmm.
and like the beneficial or the detraction ability. I don't know. Like it could be a force of good or a force of bad in
Yeah.
any application, right? Force of good. So, whenever things are looking more positive, whatever it is that's navigating that psychological reaction, like whenever that is stripped away, and in this case, usually it's price. That's the first thing we're going to look at, right? Is the price of a bitmap. That tends to be like the navigating force as far as like what is guiding your beliefs at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of people, that seems to be the only metric of concern, and that's not even just applied to bitmap. This is like in everything in web3,
Yeah.
right? So it is, yeah, whenever you're on the downside slope of that, it could be even more devastating than what the upside can bring, right? People can really damage a cause
Yeah.
in reaction to that human emotion, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So we're looking at the chart here, and like I said, when we were talking about Bitmap, it was worth exactly $0, and
Right, right,
it
right.
was just a concept, and then pretty soon after that, it was worth more than $0 for a while, and then it just sort of started. The numbers started going up. So
Yeah.
the value proposition didn't change from its inception. I think its
At all.
acknowledgement, its recognition probably did change, and therefore people saw its potential and they started adopting in. And of course, people that were in early started to take profits,
Mhm.
and we have like a full-on market here. So um,
Yeah.
does this indicate anything about a project? I mean, it does, right? It shows that there's interest, there's some buying action, therefore interest measurement. So it
Yeah.
is an indicator, but is it an indicator for developers? I think to some extent it is, but I think what Bitmap brings is more than just like the value proposition of it. It's the alignment for building out the potential metaverse on Bitcoin, and I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest attraction piece for a developer. And so, what has this attracted as far as like holder counts? Like roughly 30,000 people. Um,
Yeah.
the biggest NFT holder count for, I guess, a fairly distributed asset. Right now, we have runestones, basically
Mhm.
80,000 holders, but that was an airdrop, so it's not the same thing. Whenever you have like an asset that requires you to do work, meaning you have to go out and inscribe something that isn't already inscribed, right?
Correct.
That is a different tier of people, right? It's not the same comparing 30,000 holders for Bitmap versus 80,000 or 100,000 for Runestone. They're two
Yeah.
separate things, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's the price. And
So
let's,
yeah.
any thoughts on that, Iman?
No, I just wanted to, I guess, like begin this just like doing comparisons to Bitcoin, I guess. Like where Bitcoin, everything really starts off like this, where there's this initial euphoric awareness moment or like recognition that there's value in something that's been created, right? This happened early days of Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
yada yada yada. But as far as like what Bitcoin needed in order to continue the proliferation of that value and that sentiment behind it, it has some built-in mechanistic advantages in comparison to Bitmap, right? This 4-year halvening cycle, like this
Mm-hmm.
is built into the economics of the underlying alignment asset itself, right? Bitmap doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Actually, quite the opposite. It's actually an expansionary asset, right? So you don't have this very predictable 4-year behavior, right? People are going to naturally show up every 4 years and get reinvigorated and reinterested in Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Bitmap is completely different. Yeah, we don't have that like cheat code. Bitcoin has a cheat code to get everybody reinterested and to get developers realigned and to get like new innovations to kind of like come about from that, right? So Bitmap, we're gonna have to develop something completely independent of like built-in tokenomics being the driving force for continued innovation, right? So
Yeah.
that's where we're at, right? We've already kind of like bypassed the first mass awareness moment. We're like, yeah, this is something valuable.
Yeah.
So now it's up to the ecosystem to kind of like build in this these longevity sustainers, right?
Yeah. So,
Into the
so
future.
I like what you're saying, and I see what you're saying. I want to challenge you a little bit on this.
All right.
So Bitcoin and Bitmap, right? Bitcoin introduced something that's never been done before, like the ability to have unique digital assets, right? That hasn't been possible until Bitcoin. And then we have Bitmap. Bitmap commoditizes the creation of the metaverse in a way that we haven't seen before. And so even though those two aren't equal in terms of like value proposition for humanity, right? Being able to construct actual digital scarcity, with Bitcoin, and then Bitmap having the ability to commoditize the metaverse, meaning anybody can build the metaverse.
Hmm.
I don't see them as equal, but I see them on the same side of the coin, right? They both provide something that wasn't possible before.
Hmm.
So with Bitmap, you have the commoditization. With Bitcoin, you have like the unique digital attribute for digital items, right? So I feel like Bitmap does provide something unique, and it does provide that value proposition just by its existence. But I do agree that there isn't no built-in mechanism to like create this hype cycle that we've seen with Bitcoin every 4 years.
Yeah.
And so it's a digital construction foundation for the 3D internet, so to speak.
Yeah,
Anyth-
1,000%. I think it's more difficult to derive. It's a lot easier for people to gravitate to the scarcity equation of Bitcoin, right? Like it's something we all understand. It's ubiquitous. Understand, value perception is like something becomes harder to obtain. There's less of it, therefore it goes up in value. Bitmap is much more like up in the air, right?
yeah.
And it's just the derivation of value within this like new class of asset. Yeah, it's up in the air, right? This is why so many people are like so angry whenever they see like DMT happening, right? It's like, this could
Mm.
have been one of the things,
Hmm.
right? And it still is one of the things,
Yeah, it
right? But
still is. Yeah.
to not see that like applied immediately and directly, it feels like a threatening proposition, right? To unlocking what is that thing that's going to sustain the value perception indefinitely, right? For the next 1,000 years, 100 years, whatever. Um,
Yeah, if you consider Bitcoin as scarce, I mean, Bitmap is even more scarce. There's 800,000 bitmaps, and to get to 21 million, it'd take hundreds of years
mhm.
for Bitmap to do the equal amount, right? So, like, I mean, there's so many ways that you can kind of pitch Bitmap, and that fits your own sort of like agenda, right? It's a rare item. It's a metaverse construction, foundation. It's a hybrid token because there's so many of them, but it's
Yeah.
also scarce enough to like compete with something like Bitcoin. So you can like kind of pitch any narrative that you want, and I think that's another valuable thing about Bitmap is that you have like these different angles, these different approaches that people can leverage.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, the price
Speaking of that,
reflecting that, it's like,
yeah.
yeah, it's just it's a reflection of this, what we're talking about.
Yeah, and just the reason why to talk about it is just to kind of recenter ourselves as a community, just to like not focus too much on that alone, right? Because there's much grander things up for grabs, I think, that Bitmap represents. But again, these are just words. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to like actual execution and real delivery
Mm-hmm.
in order to like prove that there's some real value. Because yeah, Bitcoin, it was a very simple proposition, right? This is like peer-to-peer monetary system, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's very like very narrow in its roots to like its purpose, right? So Bitmap, okay, we get it. Yeah, this is a foundational layer for Bitmap or metaverse construction or whatever contribution.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of narrow, but like if you actually understand the scope of metaverse, like it's actually very broad,
Yeah.
right? Especially at this stage of like the metaverse maturation cycle. Like most people can't even like clearly define what that is, the
Yeah.
metaverse. So yeah, like we're all in this like limbo stage now. It's like, yeah, so now we have Bitmap. Clearly it's valuable, right? It's not the most valuable thing in the world, at least not yet, but it has that potential.
Yeah.
So like, this is what we said was going to happen. There's going to be a long period of time where now it's really up to the developers to figure out
Mm-hmm.
where is the actual value going to come from, right? And
Yeah.
so let's get started, I guess, on analyzing like what the developers are up to right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So the first up here is Bitoshi just released this concept of index.bitmap.
Mm-hmm.
And so this release is on an inscription, and the link will be in the description as well. But if you read this inscription, it kind of outlines like the value proposition of an index. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're wondering what an index.bitmap is, just kind of look up index.html and you'll see the value proposition there. So it essentially, like, let's assume we have an ecosystem of lots of builders. There's a lot of stuff happening on bitmaps. There's 3D worlds happening. There's a lot of people spending time. How do you extract what is happening within these like virtual environments if you have no way to like quickly pull that out so that people can see, hey, this bitmap, it's like a gambling area, and this bitmap is like a gaming area. I was like, how do you extract that? So you do that with an index.bitmap. So
Yeah.
index.bitmap is like a homepage for your bitmap,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty useful. I think I
Yeah.
wonder, it's like tokenizing, because it's an inscription, right? It's a child inscription of your bitmap. So tokenizing this web page like means that you can trade it. Now, why would you want to trade it? I don't think you would. So my question is, what happens if I send you my bitmap that already has an index.bitmap? Do you create a new index, or because you're creating something else? Like, how would
Mm-hmm.
that work? So there's still a few questions that we would need to get answered, but nonetheless, having some sort of framework that allows people to quickly know what is happening on your bitmap is very valuable.
Yeah, definitely. I can see this becoming, I mean, depending on the scope and scale of like this feels basically like a kind of like a metadata layer of a bitmap itself. I mean, even though metadata is built into like the org client, right? So you can already do that, but the application of like why you would want to broadcast certain bits of information about what it is that's happening on your bitmap, whether it's like the like game activity that's happening right within your own bitmap district.
Yeah.
I mean, somehow that can be applied for value for some sort of like non-arbitrary I don't know, emission mechanism or something like that, token emission mechanism in the future. So I think that's a little bit more complex as far as like what the utilization of that is. I think like first use case scenarios are probably going to be like just to give a much more cohesive point of view of like what's actually happening in all these individual
Mm-hmm.
virtual environments, right? Like that is like the big thing that I think can get people's attention. Kind of like when you go to Roblox and you see this like infinite array
Yeah.
of like game environments, right? Things to do,
Yeah.
things to visit, things to explore, things to partake in, right? So I think this is like the foundations of that, right? Basically, you're paralleling it with like it's the homepage of a website, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, for something like Roblox, they sort of have a built-in indexer. The
yeah.
built-in indexer is the centralized entity that built Roblox, right? They will
Mm-hmm.
tell you what is happening because they know exactly what's happening in all their servers, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
and so it's not the same for something like Bitmap, right? Bitmap, anything can be happening within that virtual environment. You need to tell people what is happening in the same way when you own a domain for a website. It's like once you create that website, you need the index.html for Google to crawl your website so that it can
Exactly.
actually know what is happening and actually rank it in Google, right? So the same
Yeah.
thing needs to happen here. It's just you gotta build from the ground up in order to enable it.
Yeah, 1,000%. So yeah, this can be applied in many different ways, and it's just another example of like how the metaverse constructs in layers, right? We have that foundational bitmap layer. We've got to add on top of that, like it's slow components, individually at a time in order
Yeah.
for these new class of developers to build on top of that, right?
Yeah.
So this is definitely a good contribution.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just again, can't overstate like how much effort is actually going to be required to
Yeah.
build out like uh, what the metaverse actually is. If you don't have that misunderstanding, it's not just like a game.
Yeah.
It
Correct.
really is as complex as the internet, right?
Yeah. All right, moving on. We have an article here that sort of breaks down Bitmap Emporium. So this is a community that's sort of growing pretty quickly, and they have like a drop coming pretty soon. I don't know quite all the details, but they've been brewing, they've been cooking stuff for as long as I can remember. Is that correct, Iman?
It's been a minute, yeah, but we've caught wind from some people that something, I guess something is actually going to come pretty soon. We've
Yeah,
been kind of like vague as far as like what is actually going to be deployed here, but clearly it's bitmap focused, it's DMT focused. This community, it continues to grow. So yeah, we're eager to like I guess come to an understanding like everybody else. Like what is it they're actually going to deliver? But yeah, this is if you want to understand more about what this initiative is, there's this article to reference.
yeah. So it's pretty long. Definitely join their community, their Discord.
Mm,
Yeah, something's about to drop, and so we're interested to see what happens. All right, moving on, non-arbitrary spaces. So this is something that's been coming up recently with a lot of the DMT stuff. And
yeah,
I don't know if people have actually looked at the Gitbook for non-arbitrary spaces, but there's a lot of information here to kind of dive in and see what is happening. Um,
yeah,
yeah, so this is just like an example of, the utility of all that we have with bitmaps and its ability to leverage that content and come up with like contributions, right? And so anybody can contribute to bitmap. You don't have to be a developer necessarily.
yeah. One of the interesting things, because we talk about bitmap all the time off camera, and I ask you is like, what is that thing you think is going to have to, you know,
Yeah,
like what specifically needs to be contribution wise needs to kind of like come to fruition in order for I guess like a mass awareness um I guess
yeah, yeah,
moment in time
yeah.
centered around
The,
bitmap specifically,
the singularity,
right?
basically, like when will we have the
Singularity, metaverse
singularity?
singularity.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's the answer is frameworks, right? You can't have like just an idea out there. It's like, ooh, we can build a metaverse. So it's like, no, you need the frameworks so that developers can hop in and contribute to the direction of the metaverse, not just like just randomization of like thoughts and ideas and implementations of whatever anyone can create without any of these frameworks. And that's why the internet was so successful. It was built on frameworks, right? It was designed as a communication protocol so that people can communicate with each other across the planet, right? And so you can only do that if people follow the same rules known as protocols. And so the same
yeah,
thing has to happen with Bitmap, right? You do that with frameworks,
yeah,
and you can have multiple people contribute their own framework, and then developers will decide which framework that they believe in, and they're going to build accordingly. And then with this framework, you're going to have different experiences, right? You're not necessarily going to have the same experience. In the same way that you jump into a Roblox ecosystem, you're doing different things. Some servers are focused on first person shooters, and other servers are more like role playing games, right?
yeah.
So yeah, that's what's needed, and the contribution here for non-arbitrary spaces is on that same realm.
Correct. Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. Just if you're building anything in regards to bitmap, like an open framework for that's what bitmap represents. It's a framework for the actual construction of the open metaverse. It makes sense to whatever it is you have envisioned as far as like you want your virtual environment experience to be detailed according to your parameters, your vision, whatever. make that become a reality, but in the back of your mind, always have the intention to platformatize that thing that you've created, right? Because you don't want to just create a singular siloed ecosystem within Bitmap. You want to create tools for other developers to basically do it, recreate, replicate, and come up with their own variable interpretations around that.
Yeah.
Which is basically the definition of a framework, right? So that is going to be like the biggest contribution you can add to this space, right? And there are people doing that,
Yeah.
ourselves included. So that's where we are, like as far as like an era to Bitmap is who's going to contribute these frameworks, right? And
Yeah.
they take time to build, and then there has to be like consensus formed around these different individual frameworks, right?
Yeah.
But at the tail end of that is the actual like when things start to like ramp up and like the fun starts to happen, right? Because now you can have like a Cambrian explosion of real content,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah, and the Cambrian explosion is now happening not only on layer one, but also on different layers such as Merlin. And so we have an example here with Bitmap War. They are building on Merlin, and they have like their development happening on Merlin, where they have like a completely designed distribution for their token, and it's completely bitmap focused, right? And so now we're starting to see like the proliferation of bitmaps outside of like just layer one.
It's true. Well, that was, Merlin is a side chain, right? So it's interesting to see, creating, locking up layer one assets and then
Mm.
minting synthetic like layer two versions of them, right? These M tokens, M bitmap, whatever. So now these locked up assets have the native functionality of that sidechain ecosystem, whatever that enables, right? In this case, like Polygon smart contracts, right? Or Ethereum smart contract, EVM compatibility, in other
Mm-hmm.
words. So
Yeah.
now you could do things, right? Like customize token emissions and stuff, things that we've seen before.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah,
So
and
it
we've
makes
had
sense. Like, yeah.
we've had like 4 to 5 years of like smart contract development, right, from different developers, and you could just take those open source contracts and modify them for whatever thing that you're building for, right? And so you can apply pretty much anything that's been built before onto Bitmap, and all of a sudden you have like a pretty like advanced ecosystem just because you're using open source smart contracts, right? And so this is just one example of such. And
Mhm.
okay, moving on. So yeah, Jeff's coming in here, says if you stake 3 bitmaps, you have all these airdrops, $450 for Merle, 500 for Voya, and all these other tokens, right? And then if you just held Bitmap, then you're just stuck with a floor price. So I figure this was interesting to bring up only because there's different risk profiles. Some people are willing to risk their assets, and then you get the risk and reward ratio, right? And so here you have people who risked and they received these airdrops, and then those that didn't receive anything. So it's all about, this is like a good example of like the financialization of Bitmap, which is a good use case that we've talked about in the past before, and now you're seeing it come to fruition here.
Yeah, it's a good like getting the ball rolling, I guess, as far as so yeah, we back in the early days of Bitmap, we talked about how, because there's such a large supply, but they're still all unique. It has these hybrid properties to it. It can be treated as like a non-fungible unit
Mm-hmm.
or a fungible one, right? And the application of like wrapping these things into like a DeFi container is like a perfect representation of that, right? You can utilize the bitmap as if it's just another fucking crypto token, right? And
Yeah.
just pull it into an asset pool, and just things just happen to generate as a result,
Yeah.
right? So we've seen this for so long with DeFi and stuff, and one of our biggest contention points and like gripes with DeFi is it's done such a good job of aggregating liquidity and then like leveraging that to basically synthesize like new derivative value out of that, but to no real intended purpose.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
no real like actual value has been um produced with that yet. Like so a lot of these like yield generation like reward tokens, they just kind of like turn into nothing,
Yeah.
right? Because there's no behind them. So it'd be good to see these mechanics applied more specifically towards some type of initiative or something tailored to actually constructing something. Maybe it's one of these frameworks we were talking about earlier or something,
Yeah, you're
right?
right. I mean, ultimately, like these airdrops, they're cool. All right, you get $450 here and there, and the financialization of Bitmap is it's proven, right? We've done it, right? But it does nothing
Yeah,
to build out the metaverse, right? You're not going
yeah, but
to. Yeah, go ahead.
this is this is what the community wants as of right now, right? We're seeing it with runestones,
Yeah,
pretty much everything. People get upset if they're not just getting airdropped like free money on a daily basis. Like this is
yeah,
a failed project at that point. If
yeah,
you're not delivering me free shit
yeah, yeah,
consistently, you've really done nothing,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, they're going to be quick to find out that this is not sustainable, right? Eventually, free stuff for nothing is not something that's going to like perpetuate. And what we need, right? If you're looking at it from like a moving the ball forward perspective, what you need is like this concentration of like value to people that can do something with that, and build out like foundational pieces
Yeah.
to Bitmap, for example. And so what we're doing here is we're identifying a problem. We need to come up with a design, a tokenomics design that allocates resources to creators and developers to build out functional pieces for the metaverse. And this is an example. It's like if you are receiving these airdrops, it's like, well, what if you imagined that you would pool liquidity, pull your bitmaps into like a single creator as an example. And instead of getting each person $450, 1,000 people contribute $450 to that individual creator, and now you have essentially $450,000 worth of like value to build out some, foundational piece to Bitmap, right? And so, like, it's the mechanism is there with these airdrops, but $450 to each person, I don't know how much value that's going to bring in the context of building out the metaverse, but nonetheless, right? The demographic of participants right now are looking for a lightning rod, which kind of
Yeah.
like directs airdrops to your wallet. So that's happening. Okay, moving on. IMSO Chris has turned into IMSO Runes. So you're not bullish enough, so he's coming out with his runes sort of strategy. So
Yeah.
if you don't know who IMSO Chris is, he's like early builder on top of Bitmap. As soon as he heard about the concept, he already started building, and he has his own like 3D experience. And the beauty here is that now his technology can be used on any bitmap. So you have a bitmap, you can connect to Bitmap Valley technology and deploy your own 3D ecosystem. So now it has an angle here for runes.
Yeah. Which we knew at some point would happen, right? The runes mania is going to permeate and penetrate everything that's pretty much happened so far on ordinals, I think. So yeah, Bitmap is a perfect space to, I think, kind of experiment and tamper with rune application, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally agree.
Considering there's such a large absence of like, mostly because like block drops haven't been activated right yet. So like we've talked repeatedly about how complex digital economics are. So in the absence of like an actual true non-arbitrary commodities layer, we're gonna have to figure out like, what are these other commodities that need to be considered within this, digital economy space.
That's right. That's
So
right.
yeah, fuck it. Let's bring them in. Let's see how they apply. Let's derive game mechanisms around the generation of runes. We're already kind of seeing it with those gobs,
Yeah,
right? It's pretty cool. Like, people are coming up with like the gamification aspect, and there's no better playground to kind of like activate that than within a bitmap environment,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it makes sense that Chris is going to be one of the first ones to execute on this because he has like an actual functioning 3D stack
yep.
for bitmap.
That's
He's
right.
like the first one to like one of the first ones to deliver that. And it's already got like the right payment channels built in within that. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see. We'll see how he delivers this rune scene. Right now, it's just like a straight up teaser,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, I expect runes to definitely play into like these different, uh, you know, uh, virtual environment stacks on Bitmap for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, absolutely. And finally, I have here a tweet here by Bitmat, and he says DMT is a testnet for Bitmap, and few understand this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I find this tweet interesting because I think from a certain perspective, like you can actually consider this as like a valuable thing. So all these like deployments with DMT and non-arbitrary tokens, Bitmap is a non-arbitrary token. DMT is a framework to release non-arbitrary tokens. And so you have this ability to like test out these assumptions and these theories that you have about creating digital commodities, right, on top of DMT, and you can apply that same sort of like application to Bitmap, and then you can see like which ones has worked and apply the ones that worked on Bitmap, and then all of a sudden you have like an advancing ecosystem at a much faster rate.
Yeah, we want to just saw that tweet. It just stood out to me. It's yeah, like just because a lot of people don't have that shared understanding, I guess, of all the things that are happening and emerging within the DMT space. It's not like some sort of exclusive event, and like it just excludes Bitmap from any consideration or application of such, right? If anything, it's strengthening what eventually is going to end up becoming the actual commodities engine for this digital economy we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Specifically the Bitmap. Because to enable that from our perspective is the most valuable like contribution of the metaverse, is to actually bring about a real digital economy that can really change some things from like an actual universal perspective.
Yeah.
Not just like this Web3 shit, right? It's like the next DJ opportunity. It's actually something that can transform human reality in like a much broader spectrum than what we're used to, right? From crypto. I mean, crypto used to be all about this type of shit, right? We used to always be driven by the potential to actually change some shit and like actually bring some real change into the financial reality of all of our existence, right? That's what Bitcoin represents. But now it's kind of like devolved into just who can make the coolest meme coin, right?
Yeah.
But the metaverse represents like we can kind of like regalvanize that mission statement, right? Like we can actually create a real digital economy where humans have a real purpose and place within that, right? But the complexities to actually achieve all of this, it's tremendous, right? So
yeah, it is. Yeah, but it's a worthy goal because right now like the zeitgeist is like all about meme coins, and that's going to be fun for a little while, but that's also going to numbers going to go down eventually, right? And once the number goes down, like, and then what? And then what do you have next? So you have to have a mission statement. You have to have a goal, right? And if your goal is just to like pump out meme coins, it's going to be short lived, right? So
that's why we say economy so often, right? Because that is the purpose of economy, is so that number doesn't go down. It's the whole purpose of it is to create real value, like real productive value, so that the whole thing stays up as long as possible, right? Because that's what our modern day economy has done, and that's what's contributed to so much human innovation over the last 100 years.
Yeah,
right?
I totally agree. Yeah, and so and saying that, like, that's a very complex thing to do, right? Only like considering like the technologies that move the ball forward versus like things that are fun for now and kind of useless later, like a meme coin. So yeah, that's not an easy task, and it's not easy for like developers to kind of figure out. It takes time. It takes experimentation. That's why it's important to test these things out. And if some people consider DMT as a testnet for Bitmap, well, test some things on DMT, right? Let's have some experiments, right? This is a good thing, right? We wouldn't make progress as a human civilization if we weren't testing out like experiments, right? That's the whole point of science, right? That's why, we talk about science in the context of DMT a lot, because that's how we make progress, right? Move the ball forward. So, but yeah, so that's it for today. We talked about bitmaps. We talked about everything that's been happening. If we miss anything as far as Bitmap goes, let us know in the comment section below. All right, man. Hopefully you get better. And yeah, man, I guess I'll see you.
I will, dude.
Yeah.
I will. I promise. I won't just stay sick forever. Yeah, if I do, sorry.
I guess COVID style forever. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you in the next video.
Peace.